Welcome to Star Watch Now, your front row seat to all the hottest gossip, drama, and breaking news from the world of entertainment. If it's trending, shocking, or star-studded, we're covering it. Love doesn't need to be spoken. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Wrapped in roses or grand confessions. Sometimes, it's as simple and as earth-shaking as someone saying, "I see you." In a world drowning in noise, this quiet moment between Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo silenced millions, and may have just revealed the truth we've all been waiting for. In the midst of flashing lights and polished performances, no one expected the most profound moment to arrive in the form of a quiet sentence. What was meant to be a routine media appearance with Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo turned into something unforgettable. For years, fans had seen them together, on screen and off, as charismatic, composed, and ever professional. Their dynamic, though electric, always remained within the bounds of public presentation. But then, in a pause between questions, Wang Yibo turned to Xiao Zhan, his tone stripped of pretense, and said, "I feel like I'm the only one who truly sees you for who you are." It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't designed for the cameras. It was bare, honest, and startling in its intimacy. The air shifted. Xiao Zhan, so often the picture of composure, was visibly moved. His smile faltered, and in that brief crack in his armor, something profoundly human emerged. There was no dramatic reaction, no attempt to deflect, just a soft, almost whispered response. "I heard it." It was all he could manage. But in that silence between the words, something far louder was said. It wasn't about love in the conventional sense, it was about recognition, about truly being understood. In that instant, every viewer watching felt the weight of the exchange. Not because of what was said, but because of what was felt. It was a moment that transcended language and crossed borders, reaching anyone who has ever longed to be seen for who they truly are. That's why this moment mattered. It wasn't a headline, it was a revelation. And once you've been seen like that, even just once, nothing is ever the same again. When Wang Yibo said, "I see you," it wasn't just a simple acknowledgement. It was a quiet rebellion against a world that so often reduces people, especially public figures like Xiao Zhan, to headlines, roles, or rumors. It was a moment that stripped away the cameras, the crowd, and the carefully curated images, revealing something raw and deeply human. In those 3 words, Wang Yibo did what few dare to do. He offered not pity, not praise, but understanding. He looked beyond the surface, beyond the fame, the scandals, the expectations, and addressed the man behind it all. For someone like Xiao Zhan, who has been both adored and attacked by the public, being seen in that way may have meant more than any applause ever could. Because "I see you" is not about watching, it's about witnessing. It says, "I've noticed your silence, your strength, your pain. I've seen the battles you fight when no one is looking." And perhaps most powerfully, it says, "You don't have to hide here, not with me." This wasn't a romantic declaration, and yet it carried a weight far deeper than many love confessions ever do. It was about emotional intimacy, the kind that doesn't demand attention but offers shelter. It was about connection, forged not in the public eye, but in the quiet, almost sacred space of mutual recognition. For the audience, it was a reminder that being truly seen is one of the most profound forms of love there is. And for Xiao Zhan, the way his guard dropped, if only for a second, said everything. In that moment, he wasn't a celebrity. He was a person, and someone saw him, not just the image but the soul. Some relationships defy categories. They don't fit into neatly labeled boxes like friendship, romance, or partnership. The connection between Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo has long lived in that in-between space, wordless, undefined, and yet unmistakably powerful. To the outside world, their bond may appear professional, formed during the making of the Untamed and preserved through years of public scrutiny. But for those who have watched closely, there has always been something more, something unspoken but deeply present. What makes their connection so compelling is not what they say, but what they don't. It lives in the way they look at each other when the cameras aren't demanding it. In the gentle way one pauses when the other speaks. In the rare stillness that exists between them, where words are unnecessary. There is a language in their silence, a trust, a familiarity, a shared history that doesn't beg for attention but speaks volumes to those who understand. When Wang Yibo said, "I see you," it wasn't simply a moment of compassion. It was a quiet acknowledgement of years spent knowing someone deeply, perhaps without fully expressing it. And when Xiao Zhan responded, not with affirmation, but with emotion, it was as if he had finally been handed the permission to be vulnerable in front of someone who wouldn't misuse it. Their relationship may never be officially defined, and perhaps that's what gives it its strength. Labels might only limit something that was never meant to be confined. What they share is more than friendship, deeper than camaraderie, and more enduring than a fleeting romance. It is a bond that has weathered the storm of fame and emerged quietly, powerfully intact. Not everything needs a name to be real. Sometimes the truest connections exist in the spaces we cannot explain. When the lights dimmed and the crowd's applause faded, Xiao Zhan didn't linger in the moment. He quietly withdrew from the stage, slipping behind the curtain with a soft nod and a faint smile that couldn't quite hide what lay beneath. Those closest to the scene say he went straight to his dressing room and closed the door behind him.
No entourage, no explanation.
Just silence. But sometimes, silence says more than any statement ever could. For someone like Xiao Zhan, who has learned to live under a microscope, this quiet retreat wasn't weakness, it was protection. A shield from a world that often demands constant performance, even in moments of personal vulnerability. In the stillness of that room, perhaps for the first time that day he could exhale. Not as an actor, not as an icon, but simply as himself. And the weight of being truly seen, so suddenly, so openly, may have felt like both a gift and a wound. It's easy to forget that strength often wears a quiet face. That sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is walk away when the world wants them to speak. Xiao Zhan didn't need to issue a statement or clarify his emotions. His silence was enough. The slight tremble in his voice, the pause before his reply, the look in his eyes, those were the truths he chose to share. What happened behind that closed door remains his. But for those who witnessed the moment leading up to it, it became clear. Vulnerability doesn't always arrive in breakdowns or words. Sometimes, it enters as a quiet exit, a need to breathe alone after being unexpectedly seen too deeply. And in that retreat, Xiao Zhan reminded us all that stillness, too, can be a form of courage. The moment Wang Yibo uttered the words, "I see you," the impact stretched far beyond the walls of the press room. It rippled outward, quietly at first, then like a wave crashing across continents. Screens lit up in bedrooms, cafes, classrooms, and quiet corners of the world. Fans from Seoul to Paris, from Los Angeles to Jakarta, pressed replay not because they missed the moment, but because they needed to feel it again. And again. It wasn't just what was said, it was what it stirred inside. Across time zones, languages, and cultures, people responded not only as admirers of two public figures, but as human beings who know what it's like to yearn to be seen. In Xiao Zhan's silence, in the tremble behind his eyes, many saw their own hesitations reflected. The fear of vulnerability, the burden of composure, the hope that someone might understand without needing an explanation. Social media didn't explode with noise, pulsed with emotion. Threads filled with stories, fan art, letters, confessions. Not of gossip, but of empathy. This wasn't just about celebrity. It became something larger, a global heartbeat, synchronized by a shared recognition of something deeply human. The simplicity of "I see you" struck a chord far beyond romantic speculation. It was the kind of truth that lingers, reshaping how people perceive love, friendship, and connection. And in a world that often rushes past softness, past stillness, this moment called for pause. What Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo gave, intentionally or not, was an invitation to feel more, to observe the quiet between the words, and perhaps most of all, to remember that sometimes being witnessed with kindness is the closest thing we have to healing. The internet didn't just react, it listened, and it remembered. The moment Wang Yibo uttered the words, "I see you," the impact stretched far beyond the walls of the press room. It rippled outward, quietly at first, then like a wave crashing across continents. Screens lit up in bedrooms, cafes, classrooms, and quiet corners of the world. Fans from Seoul to Paris, from Los Angeles to Jakarta, pressed replay not because they missed the moment, but because they needed to feel it again. And again. It wasn't just what was said, it was what it stirred inside. Across time zones, languages, and cultures, people responded not only as admirers of two public figures, but as human beings who know what it's like to yearn to be seen. In Xiao Zhan's silence, in the tremble behind his eyes, many saw their own hesitations reflected. The fear of vulnerability, the burden of composure, the hope that someone might understand without needing an explanation. Social media didn't explode with noise, pulsed with emotion, threads filled with stories, fan art, letters, confessions. Not of gossip, but of empathy. This wasn't just about celebrity. It became something larger, a global heartbeat, synchronized by a shared recognition of something deeply human. The simplicity of "I see you" struck a chord far beyond romantic speculation. It was the kind of truth that lingers, reshaping how people perceive love, friendship, and connection. And in a world that often rushes past softness, past stillness, this moment called for pause. What Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo gave, intentionally or not, was an invitation to feel more, to observe the quiet between the words. And perhaps most of weeks later, with no statement, Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo appeared together again, but not on a red carpet. They were volunteering quietly at a children's arts charity in Chengdu.
No PR.
No press releases, just paint-stained hands and shared laughter with kids who knew nothing of fame. Only joy. It was proof that their connection still exists, now expressed through shared purpose rather than fan service. No cameras.
No scripts.
Just the two of them, creating again. Together. This story resonates across generations, from Gen Z to baby boomers, because it speaks a universal truth. We all crave to be seen. Not judged, not fixed, just seen. Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo's moment reminds us that behind every performance, every polished exterior, is a real human heart. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to look at you and say, "I know who you really are. And you matter." Rainbow final thoughts. A new kind of love. Whether their relationship is friendship, creative synergy, or something deeper, does it matter? They've given us something even more valuable. A masterclass in emotional courage. A reminder that love is not always loud. Sometimes the truest love is whispered, or not spoken at all, just seen. If the story touched your heart even just a little, don't let it fade into the scroll. Speech balloon, leave a comment below. Tell us, have you ever had someone truly see you? Push pin, and if you want more emotional storytelling, celebrity moments with depth, and truths behind the headlines, backhand index pointing right, subscribe to this channel. Bell, hit the bell. Growing heart, because around here we don't just report stories. We feel them. Thank you for watching. Until next time, see others. Let yourself be seen. And remember, silence can speak louder than any words. All to remember that sometimes, being witnessed with kindness is the closest thing we have to healing. The internet didn't just react, it listened. And it remembered.